Hey team, Coach Tickety here. Today, I wanted to talk about team fights in Overwatch 2. Even though there's a variety of different maps and objectives in Overwatch, every game still plays out as a series of team fights. In this video, we'll be looking at the different stages of teamfighting, outlining what your priorities should be during these stages, and talking about how you can use these concepts to have a greater chance of success in your games. Let's start by looking at teamfighting in the simplest way possible. To do this, we're going to break down a game of Overwatch into a series of stages that fall into one of two categories. You'll either find yourself fully engaged in the middle of a fight, where the majority of both teams are throwing damage and cooldowns at each other. We'll call this the mid-fight. Or you'll be in the process of setting up for an engagement, poking and prodding at the enemy until chaos erupts, and we'll call this the pre-fight. Let's jump right into the action and talk about the mid-fight first. Mid-fights are pretty straightforward. This is where you're actively seeking out eliminations and trying to send all your enemies back to the spawn room. There are a lot of things at play during a mid-fight, but overall this is where you're looking to do a meaningful amount of damage to the enemy while avoiding taking too many hits yourself. You'll be using your cooldowns and coordinating with your teammates to the best of your ability in order to outplay your opponents who are trying to do the exact same thing to you and your allies. There are four main priorities I want you to consider anytime you find yourself in the mid-fight. Keep in mind these are sequential, meaning you should follow these in order from top to bottom whenever applicable. The four priorities look like this. Number 1, stay alive. Pretty straightforward, you can't keep fighting if you get killed. Even if this means taking yourself out of the fight briefly to get healed or wait for your cooldowns to come back, I promise that 99 times out of 100, that's going to be better for the overall team fight than sending yourself back to the spawn room. Number 2, follow your team. There's going to be a lot of chaos in the middle of a team fight, but one thing will always remain true. Two people working together will find more value than either one of them working alone. If you're lucky, you might even find teammates in your games that will work together as a 5-man squad to overwhelm your opponents. But the main thing in your control is who or what or where you decide to commit your resources, your target priority, in other words. It's tempting to run off on your own and try to get 5 kills on the enemy backline by yourself, but I promise you'll be safer and find more value by waiting to see where your teammates are committing and following their lead. If you're playing characters who tend to take the lead, for example, aggressive tanks like Winston or Doomfist, or even playmaker DPS like Genji or Sombra, then you should instead be looking for the availability of your teammates. Make sure they're in range to follow your lead before going all in. Priority number 3, deny enemy aggression. There will be times where either based on your positioning, cooldown availability, or even hero choice, that you won't be able to make the most aggressive play work. In these cases, you should be looking to shut down enemy aggression whenever it pops up. This can look very different based on your hero choice. For example, if you're a squishy backliner, this could simply mean running away from divers like Winston or Genji or Tracer just to survive their aggressive cooldown usage. Or if you're a character that can actively mitigate this aggression, or peel in other words, then you can look to put your attention where the enemy is committing rather than where your team is. A diva might look to fly into the face of enemy aggressors, or a Lucio or a Brigitte might look to boop them away from their targets. Even aggressive playmakers can follow this priority by simply turning their attention away from trying to catch enemies with their own play, and instead trying to punish over-aggressive enemies. A Reaper or a Tracer might want to hit enemy backlines, but could potentially find more value by pushing out enemy flankers who are split from the rest of their team instead. And finally, priority number 4, win at all costs. When all is said and done, when the bullets are flying, sometimes none of these situations seem particularly relevant. Maybe you don't have any team members available to sync up with, maybe the enemy isn't particularly aggressive or has already used their playmaking cooldowns. In this case, we're ready to truly enter the driver's seat. Once we've ticked all the boxes of our previous priorities, we can now focus on simply finding the most value possible. We'll be looking to outplay enemy resources and find the most value from our own. We'll be trying to find the highest priority targets and dealing the most amount of damage we can to them. This is where you'll get the most value out of strong positioning, the availability of your cooldowns, and of course, map and matchup knowledge of the enemy heroes. And that's it. There are of course other priorities to consider, like changes in positioning, exact target priority, cooldown usage, etc., but these mainly come down to the individual heroes you'll be playing, so it's hard to give direct advice in these areas. If you'd like more targeted feedback for these things, you can check out some of my other videos on the channel, or book me for private coaching through Midfight. Alright, so we've gotten into a team fight, we've done everything we can to win, and now the dust is starting to settle. Whether we won or lost the previous engagement, we are now entering the pre-fight. As a player, the pre-fight is a lot less exciting. You're not shooting your weapon as much or getting play of the game during these stages, but it's arguably more important to focus on than the mid-fight if you want to give yourself the best chance of winning a game of Overwatch. The goal of any pre-fight setup is to give yourself the biggest advantage possible when leading into the mid-fight. This can look like small advantages like strong positioning, or major advantages like finding a pick. Keep in mind that during the pre-fight, you're likely in one of two situations. You either control the objective, or you need to take back control of it. The most obvious version of this is when a defending team is holding ground before the spawn doors open, and the attacking team needs to wrestle control away from them. But this will apply on every map type and is not restricted to where your spawn rooms are. An attacking team that wins a fight will take control of an objective, and then it becomes the defending team's job to retake it. On control or push maps, the objective is neutral to start, and whoever wins the first fight will take control, leaving the other team in a position to reclaim it. Because of this changing nature, I don't like using the terms attacking and defending, since both teams will find themselves in both situations, so I'll be talking about these as either taking or holding space. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into our priorities during the pre-fight. You might have seen this coming, but our first priority is either to take or hold space. If we're holding the objective, we want to keep control of it for as long as possible. This means we'll do things like take as much forward space as possible, also known as snowballing space, to take the most advantageous fight. In other words, we want to fight on the best ground available to us. We'll be looking to abuse choke points and high grounds as much as possible to give ourselves the best positional advantage going into the next fight. If we're on the other side of things and we're taking the objective, we need to respect the space held by our opponents and move around the map safely enough to start a fight at equal footing. Rushing to the objective in many situations will actually put us at disadvantage, since the enemy will have no problem keeping their existing positions if we don't look to dislodge them. So instead, wherever we decide to commit our positions as takers, we need to understand how it benefits our mid-fight priorities. This leads into our second pre-fight priority, which is posturing, which is a combination of threatening space and poke damage. The line between posturing in the pre-fight and committing into a mid-fight is sometimes blurred, but for this video, think of it as looking to do damage without committing major resources like big cooldowns. A holding team wants to posture by again holding as much space, but also by threatening damage that will slow the approaching team down. This will do one of two things. It will either force them into safer movement options, which will give the holding team more time in control of the objective, or it will drain resources from them, which can put them at a disadvantage before the fight even starts. This can look like breaking a Rhine shield, so he has to wait behind a corner for it to recharge, buying you more time, or it could look like forcing defensive cooldowns from enemy supports that then go down more easily in the mid-fight. A team taking the objective will look to posture in order to force defensive movements and cooldowns from the enemy. The hard thing about holding is that you can't be everywhere at once. Takers will look to abuse this fact by isolating out individuals to push them out of the space that they're trying to hold. Of course, we'll look to do this as safely and efficiently as possible, as to not waste too much time on the clock and to save as many important resources as possible, and when done right, this can even lead directly into an advantage if the holding team mismanages their positions. There are thousands of other things to consider during the pre-fight, like scouting enemy positions, tracking ultimates, planning coordinated plays, etc., but these fundamentals should help build the framework in which you consider all these other concepts. And that's really it. There's obviously a lot of context-specific things like hero and map knowledge that's required to fully understand these concepts, but I hope this information will help you get a grasp on what you should be looking for at all the different stages of a game of Overwatch. Keep in mind, this is a lot of potentially new information to digest. As your coach, I need to remind you that this kind of stuff takes time to fully understand, and even more time to make a difference in your play. Don't expect to go into your next comp games and feel like a pro. In a lot of cases, you'll actually slow down your progression until you get a comfortable grasp on all these things. But with that said, I promise that understanding these concepts will help you develop as a player and can help you win more of your games moving forward. And now, just for fun, I'm going to share with you a graphic I made about team fighting that I've used to coach organized teams. As a warning, this next bit of information is going to be very macro-focused, meaning it's more relevant to players who can focus on the bigger picture or more than just their own influence in a game of Overwatch. For example, full teams of players who develop strategies together and can communicate effectively with each other. But I wanted to share it because I do believe it can be useful to help visualize some of the ideas we've been talking about in this video. Here's the graphic now. There's a couple of things I want you to notice in this chart. First, obviously, is the fact that there's 3 categories here instead of 2, like we've been talking about all throughout the video. The idea of a post-fight is not all that different than a pre-fight, but the areas focused on here can look very different than priorities in the pre-fight. In essence, just like how your priorities in the pre-fight are used to give you an advantage in the mid-fight, priorities in the post-fight are used to give advantages in the pre-fight. For example, getting a late kill or avoiding a late death means more time to work with your team on planning and setup. More information gathered through scouting and faster information sharing leads to a more detailed and comprehensive plan. The second thing I want you to notice here is the cyclical nature of the flowchart. This is to reinforce the idea that there is no real downtime in Overwatch. You should always be looking forward and planning ahead to give yourself the best chance at winning. And finally, notice the possible feedback loop between the setup and posturing phases. This is important in multiple ways. For starters, this is definitely the most important section of this chart and denotes the transition between the pre-fight and the mid-fight. Hopefully, throughout this video, you've understood how advantages during this transition can lead to more success. But it's also worth noting that a team that is fully prepared in the pre-fight can opt to instead give up their chances at a teamfight rather than commit to a disadvantage. This happens all the time at the top level of competitive play, where players will find themselves low on resources and choose to simply give up their positioning from their setup instead of losing a teamfight outright. As an individual, this concept will likely be hard to act on in your ranked games, but it definitely plays into the idea of prioritizing safety above playmaking. But if you find yourself watching some games of organized play, for example in the Overwatch League, this loop can help explain a lot of macro outplay potential, and will consistently show why the most prepared team comes out on top of the majority of fights. I'd like to say thank you to Questline Esports for helping me produce this video. You can check out their channel where we've been releasing some new quick start guides to help new players understand the different heroes available in Overwatch. Link to that down below. And that's going to be everything from me today, team. I hope this information serves you well in your Overwatch journey, and I'll see you in the next one.